Good evening, everybody. Scott Stevens here with another perspective. The first show I do of each week, Mondays, 8 o'clock Mountain. And again on Wednesdays, also at 8 o'clock Mountain Time with a little weather cut in, maybe 10, 15 minutes, closer to 15 usually. Every weekday, an hour later at 9 o'clock Mountain Time. All right, we've had a week, nearly a week since the election, and it has certainly been an intriguing week. Lots of things that both sides anticipated would go down have gone down. We have one candidate who has not conceded and another who has taken or claimed the mantle of president-elect, although there were some interesting developments on that front tonight. This amongst a backdrop where the world is approaching a great reset. Whether willingly or forced into this situation, nonetheless, we stand on that threshold of a great reset. It's on its way. We're ready for it or we're not. I think some governments are and some are resisting. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Good to see you guys coming on there this evening. There's lots to talk about, and I love your input. I love your comments, and it kind of gives me something to spin off of. So, principles or policy? That's what I want to talk about tonight. What do we run on? What should candidates present the public? Principles or policies? And it seems as if we have been lost in a world where we are dealing with only policies rather than dealing with principles. And I tend to believe that principles would take us as a nation, as a people, even when communities, much, much farther than policies. Policies that would have run in, say, 1940 or 1840, very different than ones that we are seeing today. But still, there's this underlying current that belies a principle at the core. And if we cannot promise things that we simply cannot deliver, then it's very interesting to see how policies and, more importantly, their implementation would be changed. So which will it be? Principles or policy as we run in through episode 47. I tend to get excited to vote for agendas or policies versus principles. One varies by the need versus principles, which in the highest view are immutable across time and are applicable across a variety or all circumstances depending on the particular principle. So there's our connect information if you're interested in connecting with me. So the differences between these two are astounding. Yet election after election, we are drawn to political platforms based on policies rather than principles from which policies could be, and in my view, should be initiated or formulated or constructed and outlined and then shared with the people as a vision, as the platform. And the United States has one of the world's most famous documents upon which policies could be formed, which would, as the Founding Fathers trusted, ensure the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for all of her citizens. And it isn't too late. This document endures across time. All right, last Tuesday, we had the election, but it wasn't until Saturday evening, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 4 days later, that we had Kamala Harris and Joe Biden approach the audience, and he claimed the mantle because the press had said it so, that he had won. There was an interesting hot mic moment from a Fox News caster within the last 24 hours, essentially saying he doesn't call the elections, the press does. The press declares the winner. And they have been in that position as long as I have been watching election nights. When AP calls it, when NBC calls it, when CBS, ABC, one of the UPI calls it, when one of those wire services, news services calls it, the rest of them fall like dominoes. Like, of course they called it. I see that too. It's just they rush on in. And so this is what happened Saturday night. And it was interesting. The crowd that the team approached was, very unlike any other crowd I've seen in my life. It looked like a parking lot. Very, very makeshift, although the lighting was gorgeous. Loved the blue. It was nicely set up, but it was an interesting setup. So, and then just this evening, as I was putting this together, Real Clear Politics polls the Pennsylvania call for Biden and withdraws the electoral votes. That brings him back below that magical 270 number. So it does seem that the fat lady just hasn't had her time on stage just yet. So principles is a proposition or a value that is a guide for behavior or evaluation. In law, it's a rule that has to usually be followed or desirably followed, or an inevitable consequence of something such as laws observed in nature is the way a system is constructed. The laws, much like in physics, something spins, it's going to rotate, it's going to impart angular momentum. It's a principle. You hit something, there's a conveyance of force, of kinetic energy from one object into another, and that other object has to absorb that energy delivered by the first object. It's a principle. Science is founded on principles. And in common English, it is a substantive and collective term referring to rule governance, the absence of which, being unprincipled, is considered a character defect. It may also be used to declare that a reality has diverged from some ideal or norm when something is said to be true in principle, but not necessarily so in fact. So then we have a discontinuity from that point in time. And there are other ways to apply principles as a moral law. A principle represents values that orient and rule the conduct of persons in society. And societies are as varied as people. What is okay in one nation is not okay in another, and you can get ostracized and maybe even hurt physically, and certainly looked at strangely if you happen to fall outside of that moral law. So then there's juridic law. It represents a set of values that inspire the written norms that organize the life of a society, submitting to the powers of an authority, and in this particular case, generally the state. We're coming back to laws. Laws establish a legal obligation in a coercive way. It therefore acts as a principle conditioning the action that limits the liberty of individuals. And we are agreed to this. We submit to this. These are the laws that we've agreed to do. And when you take an oath of office, you are saying, yes, I will uphold those laws. And then you're subject to them. And then there's an accountability that comes with that oath of office. And then a principle is a scientific law. The Archimedes principle relating to buoyancy and the weight of displaced water. We're coming back to the theory of kinetic energy. And in many ways, that is a cause and effect. Basic, like a Newtonian physics, cause and effect. There's also a more esoteric side to that, and that would be karma. When you put out an effect or choose not to put out an effect, there's a responsibility. There is an action where that action is held accountable on that person upon which in that moment of time a decision was needed to be made. Good to see you guys coming on there. Robin, Ryan, Tracy, Robin, and Lori. Good to see you, Lori. What a week it's been, young lady. All right, policies seem to spring from principles. The principle of equality. We will generate, develop, and try to implement a policy to achieve equality. We will develop a policy for education so that children come through their younger years with a knowledge, a working aspect of how society works, because that's largely what education is. It's training and conditioning so they can work and operate inside a society that is principled in some degree. So in policy, the term may apply to government, public sector organizations, and groups, as well as individuals. Presidential executive orders, corporate policies, and parliamentary rules of order are all examples of policy. Policy differs from rules or law. While law can compel or prohibit behaviors, policy merely guides actions towards those that are most likely to achieve a desired outcome. That's the difference. Policy is a guideline, a framework upon which we can build a solid outcome. If we want to impact climate, then we have to develop a policy to change some kind of behavior. So this is where we are. We're dealing with an eruption of new policies being presented in society. And what do we do with these policies? How do we affect these changes in policies for the Great Reset, or if that does or doesn't happen, depending on the globalists, what do we do locally? Because, as they have also said, COVID has presented an opportunity. So one of the things that we've done here at Metadime is Vicki had written a book, SOS 2030, Sink or Swim, the Survival Guide for the Next Decade. And much of the topics that we talk about in this book are mirrored in the World Economic Council and their desire for the Great Reset. Problems are problems. We all see them. How we affect the change to the betterment of humanity comes down to policies, because the principles will remain the same, that we should be given substantially similar opportunities. Now, granted, outcomes are going to be greatly different upon people because, hey, we're individuals. And that is our right as beings, is our beautiful individuality. That's our strength. That's our diversity. That is our power as a species, is our individuality. And that individuality is granted all beings, whether you're cats and dogs and birds, ants and those kind of things have hive mentalities. They're just young souls. Whereas when you get the opposable thumb, the ability to walk and communicate and consider the concept of God, then you're far more evolved down that path to evolution, if you will. So principles versus policies. And we talked earlier about the Constitution, where we have laid out these principles. The First Amendment: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. Simple enough, right? How could you say so much in so few words? The fewer the words spoken, the cleaner the message, the more easily it is to digest. This is a big issue with all of the policies and even the legal code that this country has. Could fill up more than my house, and there would be trailers outside. There is so much wordiness, so much code, that we've come away from principles, guiding principles. Second Amendment: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's pretty darn simple. So, as we begin to look at the two parties, and there were more than two parties, and that is the fascinating thing, is how could we just keep this discussion just to two parties? For me, that is a huge disservice to the American people and to the process itself. To keep the discussion contained within red and blue, when we have a rainbow of 7 colors right now, not just in parties, but 7 colors. So why settle with red or blue when there's all of these other opinions and points of view that should be considered? But when we have a commission on presidential debates, when we have a party structure and system upon which you must successfully be accepted into before your points of view can be considered, that limits the broadness of the discussion, that limits the concepts, that limits the ideas that can be presented to the people for discussion. And then, if you have to stump, if you have to hit 50 states, if you have to hit 10,000 towns, if you have to hit, 500 districts or 435 districts to talk to these people one by one, because you can't get through the press to talk to them, it becomes an exceedingly exhaustive process. So we have dumbed down bullet points at this point, now that this nation is now 250 years ago. Yeah, Ryan established a false binary, keeps people fighting each other and not their controllers. And this is something that we're going to need to probably recognize here in the very, very short order, is that we can move beyond that. All right, did we lose that? Maybe application window. I kind of went and swept off to the side. There we go. All right. So what we have is, let's just quickly look at 3 of these things. Former Vice President Joe Biden has never really sought or received a reputation as a deep thinker on domestic policy matters. His highest profile role as a senator involved the judicial confirmations and his time changing in the Foreign Relations Committee. As vice president, he's best known as in the national security domain as a personal emissary from the White House to Congress. And so his pitch in the primaries was overwhelmingly about electability. This came from Vox.com. And Bernie Sanders, the Medicaid for all, what was the other one? The free education. That was a big thing. And the other one is big minimum wage increase. Again, we're trying to deal with the principle of some kind of equality or fairness. What values one job so much more than another? How can a CEO, which 40 years ago, whose income was maybe 20 times tops their average employee, versus now 300, 400, 500 times plus all of these other perks? So we've left that income disparity out, and that's why this policy has been brought up, to increase the minimum wage, to bring that ratio ever so slightly closer to where the upper management has found themselves and delivered themselves over the last 30 years. So Biden's commitment to raising the federal minimum wage from its current $7.25 an hour, I remember when it was $3.35 an hour, to $15 an hour is one of the least talked about plans at stake in the 2020 election. Free college for most. He was also an early proponent of free college. In a 2015 Rose Garden speech, he said that we all know that 12 years of public education is not enough, especially today. And even now, once you leave college, are these college kids finding jobs? Are they finding good paying jobs? Is that education allowing them to enter the workforce at a substantially similar place as to where their fathers or their grandfathers with the college education, say with the VA bill, after World War II? Is it even similar to that? Or has inflation run so far out ahead? Has specialization of jobs and trades gotten to the point where the college education is almost irrelevant, that one would be better off with a mentor or a trade school rather than going through a very, very expensive 4-year program and wondering, what do I do? Now I'm a teacher, getting a job for 40 grand if I'm lucky for the first year out of college, but I've got 60 grand worth of debt trailing me. How do I do that? So free college is an interesting concept, but there's also a part of me that says that something is free is worth exactly what you pay for it. So there's got to be some value that is above and beyond what we're giving the kids presently, because if all of a sudden it's free, somebody's still paying the salary, somebody's still operating the campuses. Somebody's going to pay for it, because nothing, I promise you, and you know this firsthand, nothing in life is free. There's always an added cost to it. What will probably happen inside of a generation, if we're allowed to continue on, is that private schools thrive, because that's where the money, where the investment, and the children that could best take advantage of that leg up would end up. So we'd end up with a 2-tiered college system. Not that we don't already, but it would probably become more stark. Again, unintended consequences when you introduce something free. All right, climate change is a huge, complicated issue. And Biden's stated climate agenda, like proposals from other Democratic campaigns, it has a lot of moving parts, covering everything from investments in advanced biofuels to clean drinking and proposed securities and exchange regulatory change that will require companies with stock listed on the major markets to make public disclosures of their climate risk. And I don't even think that this is a doable goal. There's probably other places, other technologies that we could roll our policies into, upon which we could develop a sustainable economy and reduce, I don't even want to say carbon, because CO2 is a plant fertilizer. Let's just say other pollutions. Now, I think the greater risk is what we are doing underground. And that cost cannot directly be measured like we can sample CO2 out of the atmosphere. What is happening with fracking is going to impact groundwater, not for just a few generations, but for millennia to come. It will take that long for that water to cycle through, to be refiltered, and then we'll end up with hotspots where as the pioneers, the invaders, if you will, moved out across the American West and checked stream after stream. Is this good water? Can we drink this, or is it soured? Is it deadly to the horse? Do I have to go on and look for another stream? Do I have to go further down the mountain range to find clean water? And I think we'll see that happening, and it'll last hundreds and hundreds of years because of the impacts of fracking. So that becomes a policy issue. The other thing with dealing with policies is today, I hit this on Dr. Naomi Wolf. She wrote the book Disaster Capitalism, and a lot of disasters, man-made or not, are for the juicing of gross domestic product. You destroy something, it has to be rebuilt. Somebody pays for that. That's capital, that's potential, that is stored up money, that is someone's energy that has got to be redeployed into the economy at that moment because the need is immediate. And so now she's looking at the medical needs, perceived needs of the new campaign. And if she had known that Biden was open to lockdowns, as he now states, which is something historically unprecedented in any pandemic and terrifying in practice, because it'll never end, because the elites love it, she would have never voted for him. And now we're back to policies rather than dealing with principles. This is what we need to be running on, our principles, because these policies, once you get into a position of power and see the structure that has built up around you, the government that has so many processes to get something done. You've got the Senior Executive Service, a branch that was initiated, begun, signed into law by Jimmy Carter back in the late 70s. That is the part of the government that never, ever dies. They're there across administrations. You can bring in a new Secretary of Energy. He can bring in his crew, but he still is working under the Senior Executive Service. And they tell the new administration exactly what can be done and what can't be done, and how long some rule change that seems great in policy on the political stump speeches will take to happen. This, in many ways, is the gift of executive orders, is you can exert policy right then and there with the writing of the policy and then the signature. And this is why executive orders have become so incredibly popular during the last 30 years. All right, so we all agree change needs to happen. And what was open for discussion is how or whose principles we must abide by to accomplish this long-desired goal, the reset. And it has been heard over and over and over again in every crisis. There is an opportunity, a principle upon which all governments utilize. But the question is whether these opportunities are organic or are they manufactured. Either way, it is a crisis. So what are the goals that these principled seek to enact? And when they do begin to present this reset to the people, will that fall within legal terms of the Constitution? So are U.S. constitutional rights sustainable under this United Nations Agenda 21? And this Agenda 21 was laid out in the Rio Summit in 1992. I was, 26 at the time, and a lot of it I thought was a pretty good idea. Being in meteorology and being in weather, and we'd just kind of begun to be hammered with the global warming, the climate change. Okay, if we're going to do something about this, I'd already realized that we've got to move beyond oil and gas. That was kind of an inevitability. Before we found and began to use oil and gas en masse, we were decimating the ocean's whale population for lamp oil, or keeping the lard from our farm animals as an oil, as a fuel. So in this larger centuries-long progression, it was the natural thing to do. It was the proper thing to do. And when you have oil oozing out of the ground in Pennsylvania, in California, in Texas, it's black gold. It didn't require sailors heading out to sea and whaling. We could do all of that on land, and the economies boomed because of the ready available BTUs, British thermal units, that were immediately available. And the Industrial Revolution just got a shot of adrenaline. It was the best thing to happen. But that was 170 years ago. We can change, and we have had inventors come along and show us the way. But there's just this cabal that doesn't quite want to let go of the money, of the tax that energy exerts upon our society. All right, so Sustainable Development Goals, the 17R, no poverty. And I have to say, good luck with that. We're individuals, as stated off the top of the show. Some people are content to work like dogs, and gladly so, and others, you can't get off their behinds. Why should everyone be equal when no one is equal? We're all different. We're all different. Zero hunger. Okay, we can eat. There's enough food. There really is enough food. Good health and well-being, and that's a subjective point of view. Quality education. I had some teachers that were better than others. You end up in the system, and in many ways, it's the luck of the draw. Which school district your parents are in. I probably, in my whole 12-year portion of that, I had maybe 3 teachers that were exceptional. The rest were okay, and some retarded my willingness or want to learn. And some of that I didn't have another good teacher in that particular study in English or literature until 5-6 years later. So quality education would be nice, but when we're failing upwards, when there's massive graduation of kids, of students that can't do math, that can barely read, then something else has got to change. And if they've got control of the system now, I don't know how all of a sudden a great reset is going to allow for a quality education unless we completely do it differently and send people and kids out to learn on their own pace, on topics that they're actually interested in, rather than this cookie cutter agenda, this cookie cutter curriculum that we're all forced by the tens of millions to march through. And instead of it being excited to go to school, to do something new, to push your boundaries, you're dreading that teacher in 4th hour that just is angry, puts you in a corner with a hat on, or slaps your hand because, you're just kind of chatty. I was one of those. Gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. We can get there. We have the technology. And with clean, affordable, and I'm going to say free energy because that technology has been here for more than a century, that will allow clean water and sanitation. Clean energy, once we can get these non-solar, non-wind, but clean, sustainable, new Tesla-type technologies out there, so much of this agenda is possible. But it has been deliberately kept back from inventor after inventor after inventor for decades now. So what I'm saying is that there's something behind there that they're not telling us. They say they want something, but do they really? The policy looks good, but the principles behind it fall short. Decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Okay, that means work. Industry means work, or could mean work. It could mean robotic work. It's a possibility. Innovation and infrastructure. I'm back to clean energy on that particular one, because with clean, limitless energy, I don't want to say clean energy, limitless energy, we completely do away with the needs for roads in many ways. We could do trails and paths, but roads become almost, especially from city to city, become a redundancy. And when you can travel 20 feet above the ground, 80 feet above the ground, 100 feet above the ground, what's the difference? And at hundreds of miles per hour, then we begin to put a real nice jolt into the economy. When the car showed up, the economy grew. When air travel showed up, the economy grew. When telecommunications emerged on the scene, the economy grew. So innovation and infrastructure can play hand in hand, and when you could fuel that with free, limitless energy, imagine the potential. Reducing inequality. Again, we come back to individuality. You can't force sameness. You can, but you'll end up with resentment and people trying to break out of the system. Then that resistance, that fight in the man, is back. And what have we accomplished? Sustainable cities and communities comes back to energy. Responsible consumption and production, climate action, whatever that may be, life below water. This is an interesting aspect because water is 70% the surface of the planet. That is a whole world that is largely undiscovered, at least to civilians. The military, the intelligence agencies know what's down there, and they're not too excited to get us down there. Life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Let's just say institutions that serve humanity and partnerships with gold. So much of this was adopted a while back. So these are the top 10 job skills of tomorrow and how long it takes to learn them. So they're anticipating that 50% of all employees will need reskilling. Did you get that word, reskilling? By 2025, as adoption technology increases, according to the WEF Future Jobs Report. Critical thinking and problem-solving skills top the list, as employers believe they will grow in prominence over the next 5 years. Newly emerging this year are skills in self-management, as we're learning with COVID. When you don't have the boss looking over the corner, things change. There has to be some self-accountability for how you show up to work. Self-management such as active learning, resilient stress, tolerance, and flexibility. Respondents to the Future of Jobs survey estimate that around 40% of workers will require reskilling of 6 months or less. That's not so bad. But what are we being reskilled for? I guess some of these skills are innate. Either you're kind of inherently a problem solver. Maybe that can be taught, but I think so much of this is just inside of us anyway. And testing that we have done through grade school, through secondary school, begins to kind of reveal those students upon which those kind of skills are apparent and available. And that's when the recruiter shows up and says, hey, son, talk to me. And then the next recruiter, me, over here. So much of this is mental. It's emotional and how we think, how we complex problem solve, creativity, originality, and initiative, leadership, and social influence. That is a very curious top 10 skill, is leadership ability, technological use, monitoring and control, tech design, and programming. This has been the buzzword, when they were, kicking out the coal miners back in West Virginia and Kentucky. I'll learn to code. Not very genuine, but probably fairly truthful about where the future is going. And if you don't think you can do those kind of things, if you don't think you have that skill or ability in you because it was nowhere near your consciousness when you're going to school, then it isn't a possibility until you think, well, maybe I can. You would enter a program, test it out. Maybe there's something there, and you go for security, and you end up in database management. Who knows? But there's a whole menu of different jobs soon to arrive. Reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. I like that word, ideation. So we have the tools at our disposal. The bounty of technology innovation, which defines our current era, can be leveraged to unleash human potential. And this is all from the official website. I mean, this is the best face they could put on the reset. There are other points of view with this. But what they're seeing, and COVID is showing us, is that there is a huge need, that 50% of the people are going to need new jobs. They'll need new training, new reskilling. But those new fields must emerge soon so that the retraining structure, their training programs, can then emerge around them. So these people feel like there's a future. Otherwise, it's simply despair. The other part of this that this reset goes into is population. The greatest concern is for the ability of this planet to sustain the demands on the natural resources that it presently endures day after day. The fishing, the pollution, which we saw is so great once the shutdown happened in March. All of a sudden, mountain ranges in India that were right there are visible. You can see them. All of a sudden, the canals in Venice, which were muddied and turbulent because of so many propellers, so many ships transiting back and forth, up and down, and once that stopped for just a day, the sediment was allowed to settle and the clarity in the water returned. Oh, there are actually animals. There is life in that water. And when you see that life, a different respect for its potential begins to manifest. All right, so what happens, just the United States, for example, railways would be the primary means of getting from here to there. Proposed railways. And this has been in discussion for quite some time, but right now they're rather expensive proposals. Even the struggle to get one from LA to San Francisco met a lot of, let's just say there were people taking money on the side, and that just became too great a load to get the project finished. So I would see, and they're seeing, rail coming back. What that means, though, is will we have the economy to sustain the present interstate highway system? And I'm going to suppose that probably not. That we may be in that last generation that can get in the Chevy and go coast to coast at our own pace, at our own time, stopping when and where we would like to. If this happens, that luxury may not exist. As we're back into community transit, we're back into obstinately a more efficient system. And that's the whole point that they're trying to bring it out, is to make these natural resources, give them a longer life than what they appear to have right now. So we would end up in corridors, zones where humanity lives. And then the Great Plains probably would see animals reintroduced. Private property has been promised to be taken away from us so that this planet can heal. And it is the desire, it is the plan of this group of people to restore this planet to a more pristine state. The Georgia Guidestones went up in 1980, and there was a population goal stated there, and that was a sustainable population of 500 million. Presently, we're bumping up on 8 billion. So 500 million goes into nearly 8 billion 16 times, meaning roughly 1 in 15 of us will be here to see this new day. The rest have to watch it come to a conclusion, to watch the old age draw to a close. So it'll be curious to see how that comes about. Now we're at the position, because of this reset, where the money system is probably the first one to blow up. And what they've done and they're trying to do is set up secondary systems, central bank digital currencies, so that you can have your device with you, upon which a wallet can be generated, a unique digital code, and you can get your income from the system. That replaces your working job, because remember, we're really cutting back on the economic engine of the planet. We're trying to reimagine this thing. We want to be able to clear some space on the surface of the planet so it can heal. And we do that by reducing people's demands on the planet. So if you're only given this much money when typically you may have had this much, that means your impact on the planet has shrunk. You think, and the let's just say the Extinction Rebellion people protesting, even during this election, candidates taking a private jet from point to point. They were protested. There was one where I saw Elizabeth Warren literally ducking and hiding. Don't see me getting off this little jet because it's a policy I've been talking about. We can't have the millionaires taking the private jets. So we would rather send a motorcade with multiple vehicles and do it that way. At least that in policy is how it's supposed to work. But it'll be the money system that goes first. First it was the healthcare, that precipitates the money crisis. So either we end up with a corporate blockchain, like an Amazon coin, like Facebook's Libra, or one of these other ones, like a Bitcoin, like an Ethereum, like Litecoin, potentially Ripple, but I'm thinking because it's corporate-based, probably not. But then this is where our funds end up. And it may be that these outside of the central bank funds become black money. They are kept underground and black market, if you will. That's a possibility. We don't know this because these laws, these policies have not been clearly articulated. To some degree they have, but not to everyone. So we're at this point where COVID, election discontent, economic discontent, and injustices, if you will, have been in place for a long time. And this reset would like to address some of those. but it won't go down without friction. And unrest, unease, or just outright friction amongst the people can act as soap. Soap lifts the dirt, the grime, the things that cling on. Just refusing to let go, this reset can allow us to see and therefore recognize the dirt and grime that coats us all. This pain eventually prepares us for a healing that we speak of, yet find it so difficult to embody. And that's going to be what this is about. They would like to see us let go of the old ways, and I think in many ways we would like to have that too. But who eventually guides us through? That is going to be the big thing. So as we talked about a couple of shows ago, what to come is never hidden. Only the hand that affects the change, that flips the switch, that creates the strife and unrest remains hidden. So we look at one another and blame our neighbor. Blame the one that thinks slightly different than you, that wants a different outcome, that wants a different person in office because of their policies. Even though at heart, in soul, we all have the same principles. We all know truly right from wrong, but we're attached to different policies. One basic truth can be used as a foundation for a mountain of lies. And if we dig deep down enough in the mountain of lies and bring out that truth to set it on top of the mountain of lies, the entire mountain of lies will crumble under the weight of that one truth. And there is nothing more devastating to a structure of lies than the revelation of the truth upon which that structure of lies was built, because the shockwaves of the revelation of the truth reverberate and continue to reverberate throughout the earth for generations to follow, awakening even those people who had no desire to be awakened to the truth. So we're at a point where our angst, our anxiety, our willingness to defriend and unfollow because of people's adherence to policies, we're willing to nearly sacrifice the liberty that our fathers and our forefathers fought and died for. Policies, not principles. But principles are what guided the forefathers to today. And it's time we pick up once again those principles upon which this nation was founded. And we can once again regain, re-enliven this nation so that it will survive another generation, that it will look back at this election of 2020 not as an angst, not of one of discontent and civil unrest, but one of a God-given opportunity to move beyond policies that have not served us and back into principles upon which we were founded and has survived, even under great strain at times, into the future. And I can see that day that this is accomplished, that leader will emerge to once again unite brother, father, mother, and daughter across generations and for generations to come. All right, guys, that's another perspective on this Monday night. I'll hit you up in the comments after the show. Yeah, we do, Ryan. We do remember the great teachers. And we are grateful. Mr. Toady, my third grade science teacher, actually he was homeroom, third grade, inspired me while I was living in Gallup, New Mexico. And then Coach Wilson for literature, 10th grade. He undid a lot of the damage done in 4th grade English. It's just we thrive when we get good teachers, and that is a really, really tough place to be if you're in an education system and you have to go every day without inspiration. And this is why we enjoy going to school and learning and exploring, is because of the inspiration that we're given. And this is, in my eyes, what has been missing. And the big issue with elections is they have become platforms to tear down one side rather than paint a future under which all can thrive. All right, guys, have a great night. I'll see you in just a little bit for a little bit of weather. I guess that's only about 15 minutes away. May change ties, may not. All right, have a great night. In the meantime, keep looking up.